All right. Welcome to another episode of The Close Up. I'm your host, Stephen Cameron, a part of the Orlando Magic HQ network. Psyched to be with you all today. It's been a couple of weeks since I've done a show, and this is the first show that I'm kind of like looking at as the start of my new season. I'm going to get off of the off-season schedule where we've been doing it like every other week, and I'm going to get back to doing shows weekly as best as possible, and my shows will shift back to being released earlier in the week than where they have been being released on Fridays, so that way you're going to hit double episodes with the Orlando Magic HQ. You'll get my show early on Tuesdays, and then you'll get Alan Anthony's, the flagship show, on Fridays. This week's show is actually being released on Wednesday simply because the breaking news of Wendell Carter Jr.'s contract extension broke 10 minutes before I was supposed to record with our guest this week. And then our guest, Jason Beede of the Orlando Magic, or the Orlando Sentinel, beat reporter for the Orlando Magic, he had to jump and do his job. So we pushed the recording one day, hence the release one day. But I'm back. We're back. We're going to be getting back into action, kicking the season off right with talking to someone really close to the team. We talk about the Wendell Carter Jr. extension. We talk about training camp, themes that he's starting to see and what we're learning, and some questions that we still need to learn from training camp. And then we talk about, of course, preseason game versus the Pelicans and kind of some things that we can take from that and what we can just take moving forward with the future preseason games we'll see in the next couple of days and weeks. So make sure you give Jason a big shout out and follow his work. He does a great job covering the Magic. And yeah, it's going to be a really cool season for reporting and content this year for outlets like us at HQ and outlets like Orlando Sentinel with Jason. Speaking of HQ, make sure you're following our team. We are putting out so much content right now. Our YouTube channel is booming between our shows and Brett James, our reporter, putting out tons of really good content out there. We do got Brett James, our senior reporter. He's going to be going to as many home games as possible. Last year, I think he missed like 2 of the home games. So he'll probably be, cranking around 40-something home games again this year. We're really looking forward to that. He puts out content multiple times a week. So follow him on Twitter and make sure you also subscribe to our YouTube channel and our podcast channel so you can continue to get not only the podcast and YouTube show content, but our more journalistic content with Brett being so present around the team often and, talking about the team news as it gets updated and stuff like that. So Orlando Magic HQ is where you want to be tuned into. All right, let's get to the housekeeping before we get into the conversation with Jason. First and foremost, this podcast is brought to you by the Believe Podcast Network. We've been with them for a couple of seasons now, and we're really psyched on that partnership. They've hooked us up with a company that you've heard us talk about a lot is Bet Online. They are presenting this podcast. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. We're in the thick of football season, people. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and every live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. If you want to bet on preseason, I'm pretty sure you can bet on preseason basketball on there too. Think you know your stuff. You can get in on a 200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance to win a weekly prize and a share at the 200,000. That's for football. Go do it. That's pretty cool. A 200,000 mega contest. That's pretty sweet. When the game's over, you can just head over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with over 150 slot games. They got it all. It's great. And you can use your web app or on your phone or on a web server. The app or the server is really good. And head over to the website. It's awesome. So get in on the action. Bet Online. The game starts here. Gamble responsibly. And also, Orlando Magic HQ, we're continuing to look for partners for this coming season. if you are a small business owner or someone that works with a company that you think would be a good fit for us, your message could be reaching thousands of people across the Central Florida area. We have a really big reach between our YouTube channels, our podcast, audio platform channels, and our written content. So there's so many different ways to partner with us and get really good advertisement for your companies with Orlando Magic HQ. So just holler at us, shoot us a DM if you're interested in that, or you can shoot us an email at admin@orlandomagichq.com. We'd love to hear from you. With all that being said, let's get into it. Make sure you like and subscribe to this show. Leave a comment if you can. And here's the conversation with Jason Beede of the Orlando Magic, beat reporter of Orlando Sentinel. All right, Magic fans, like I said, I got Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel joining us, the Orlando Magic beat reporter. Jason, you've been on the show a few times now. Welcome back. How you doing tonight?
Doing really good. Even though there's a hurricane barreling towards Florida, I'm hanging in there. I'm getting ready and set, and gonna be hunkering down with some family in Orlando. Obviously praying for the folks. I have a lot of friends in Tampa and on the West Coast, and it's just awful to see. And hopefully it's not as bad as we expect it to be, but just hanging in there right now. So.
Yeah, this hurricane is no joke. You know, I have all my family still in Orlando, and it's a place I come to often because of my family. And we dealt with a tree going through our house 2 years ago, and like we have another super old oak tree in the backyard, and we're just like fingers crossed it does not come over with this hurricane. So we'll see. Yo, people, if you were listening to this and you haven't evacuated and they've told you to evacuate, get the fuck
Stop
out of
listening.
there, okay? Turn this off. Turn it on while you're driving away from where you were not supposed to be, all right?
There you go.
Yeah, but jokes aside, be safe, people. And Jason, I'm glad it sounds like you have a good plan and situation in place, and hope you and the fam are good during this time. Until this hurricane hits, we are recording this Tuesday night, October 8th. We actually were going to record this on Monday, and then we had the breaking news of Wendell Carter happen literally 10 minutes before Jason was supposed to jump on the show. Obviously, Jason had work to do at that point, and so we rescheduled this for Tuesday tonight. But Jason, before we dig too much into like this season, I kind of just want to ask about you and we've kind of hit the little over a year mark with you and covering the Magic full time and going into your second full season. How are you feeling versus year one going into year two? What are some things that have changed for you? I want to hear how you're doing, man.
Yeah, I think the confidence level is so much higher. I mean, obviously I'm confident in who I am at my work and what I do. I think it speaks for itself. But obviously when I was coming from a UCF beat that I covered for multiple years. I knew everybody on the beat. I knew the coaches, the players, the other media, everything that went involved with that, to basically not only, jumping into a new beat, but drowning in it, from meeting new people. I dealt with the Magic a little bit here and there. I knew some of the communications staff, and I had covered a handful of games just kind of over my years at the Sentinel. But obviously doing that versus being the actual beat reporter is a bit different. So, year one was so much fun to experience the playoffs, to experience the Game 7, to experience multiple road trips and everything that goes with that. I think I learned something every single day on the beat last year. So with that, experience, it's just like with the players, experience is the only way you learn, right? So, and that's with anything in life. But for me specifically on the Magic beat, it's a confidence level that brings excitement at an even higher level than it was before. And obviously, knowing that this is a team that will return to the playoffs, potentially could earn home court in the playoffs, certainly in that grouping in the East, makes it even more exciting. And just to have a stronger relationship with all these guys, this is outside of, meeting Contavious Caldwell-Pope and getting, Tristan DeSilva and Cory Joseph. Everyone's the same. I mean, everyone's back. Obviously there were a few guys off the team. I'm going to miss Joe Ingles in the locker room, but everyone else, Paulo, Franz, Jalen, Wendell, we talked about just that relationship continues to grow stronger. And of course with Jamal Mosley, he's a great head coach to work with. And the communications and PR people at the Magic do a fantastic job, one of the best jobs in the league. So there's just a higher level of confidence, an even greater level of excitement. And it's just a lot of fun to cover this team.
With all that, I mean, first off, I love the coverage that you did this first year. I'm looking forward to continue to reading it and seeing it the second year. With the team's success last year, does your boss come to you and say, okay, we got to do things, there's even more to do this year? Or is it just kind of like status quo, maintain what you did last year? Has anything changed on your side because the team has had this step in success and the expectations are higher?
Yeah, I think, from a day-to-day perspective, it doesn't change a whole lot in terms of my expectations. I mean, we hold ourselves to a high standard, obviously. My sports editor is a former NBA beat writer who covered the Pacers, the Wizards, and a handful of different teams for a long time before he became the sports editor. So he's been extremely helpful in my transition and this past year and entering year 2 in the beat. With that said, obviously, having that strong relationship with these guys, you're able to dive a bit deeper. I think I did develop a good trust with a lot of those, with a handful of players. I want to continue to develop that trust, to tell deeper stories, to learn more about these guys, and someone like Wendell Carter Jr. talking about media day, how he was not really believing in himself, and he had to dig deep over the offseason. I want to learn more about that, right? I want to learn more about Jalen Suggs and what he's going through with these contract negotiations. I know we're going to talk about that, but and a rising star in Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner, and so in terms of like big picture pieces and stories that just don't take a couple hours to write, we're talking multiple days, multiple weeks to write, to report on. I only got to do one of those pieces last year. I wrote a big piece on Jamal Mosley before the playoffs began. And for that, I spoke with a lot of different coaches, a lot of different players, including Steph Curry and some other players around the league that been around and played for a bunch of different coaches. I'm hoping to do more of that big picture work, really, really stuff that, you can't get anywhere else, because I have these relationships and I'm going to continue to develop these relationships with these guys. And it's just a great group to work on and work with. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, not necessarily the day to day, because obviously it's going to be a high standard regardless. But in terms of the expectations, we're going to have our Orlando Sentinel preview section come out a little bit before the regular season tips off, and just continue to work on big picture pieces that really dive deep and show some of the behind the scenes with this team.
That's exciting. Those types of pieces, when they come out, they always do so well because there's just so many good nuggets of gold, whether it's, a lot of good ones over the years with the Sentinel and then some of the other beats that have covered the team too. They're always so fun when we can get those more personal one-on-one type of deep dives and learning about a player more than just what we see on the court, right? More than the X's and O's and the scores and stuff like that. So that's fun. I'm looking forward to seeing your development with that this year. That'll be super cool. Jason, you kind of teed it up perfect for our next topic, right? You mentioned Wendell Carter there at Media Day and kind of like what he was thinking about this offseason with his comments there, and building trust back within himself and confidence and things like that. And like we mentioned earlier, our podcast recording got delayed because the Magic just announced a nice new deal with him. He signed, let me scroll back up to my notes. He signed a 3-year, $59 million contract extension. To be clear for the listeners, he's still got 2 years on his current contract. So 24-25 this season, and then 25-26 is his current deal. Then he's got 3 more years after that going through the 28-29 season. And I believe, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that third season is a team option.
That's correct. I was able to confirm that today after Tim Bontemps of ESPN first reported it. But yeah, that third year is a team option. I guess I don't think the Magic are able to do a deal without a team option being included.
Yeah.
All these deals seem to have one of those.
They're good at that.
It's really smart. It's extremely team friendly. Yeah.
So you had your initial article that you posted pretty quickly after the news broke, right? Where, it's the typical style of, this is Wendell Carter's new contract. This is what it looks like. And this is kind of how he's impacted the team and a little bit of his history and a little bit of contract details. Really, really well done. If you haven't read that yet, listeners, go back and check that out. Now that we've sat on this news a little bit longer, it's been about 24 hours, some emotions, a lot of different thought process. You and I were even talking about it this morning in our chat with each other. What are your thoughts about this contract extension now and why the Magic decided to kind of like do this now versus waiting a year from now when they could have done literally the exact same deal with the same price? So like, just kind of like, now that things have settled down, I want to know what you're thinking about right now.
I think something that maybe the average fan, and obviously if you're listening to this podcast, you're a big fan, maybe the average fan that just goes to games and that just has a fun time at Magic games and whatnot. And not just Magic fans, but I think the average fan around the league might not realize just how complicated the new CBA is. We just saw that with the Karl Anthony Towns trade, just how difficult it was to
Yeah.
get some. I mean, you read about, I think the Knicks to get around one of the deals to get around the deal, something they had to do was teams that are over one of the aprons. There's like the second apron, the first apron, and into the tax and whatnot. You can't sign a certain number of minimum contracts, so they sign the guys for $1 million over the minimum contract to work around. So teams are trying to find loopholes and whatnot. But my point is, the new collective bargaining agreement is extremely complicated for team building, and the whole point of that was to slow down what you saw with these super teams the past decade or so in the league. And with that, I think you're probably right that if they waited a year, the contract would have looked exactly the same. But in that opportunity, I think when you have the terms agreed to between the two sides, you can secure one of your foundational pieces. You know the numbers you're working with in the future. I don't see why not. I mean, if you're Wendell Carter Jr., number one, you know that from his perspective, you're aware of your own injury history. It was obviously great to see that his hand is no longer a problem. That's something he talked about at media day. It seems like he just has a left ankle sprain. Obviously, a cause for concern. We're going to see whether or not he plays against the Spurs. It is just the preseason, but it doesn't seem to be a serious injury based on what everything is, what Jamal Mosley said, what Wendell said himself. But knowing his injury history, the fact that hasn't cracked, I think, 60 games the last couple of years, he's aware of who he is and the history he has with injuries. And obviously, if you fall on your left hand, you break it. That's just unlucky. Some of the other
Not
injuries
ideal.
are more consistent. Some of the other
Sure.
injuries are more consistent with who he is as a player. But when he is healthy, he's a really good big man. He does a lot of little things for the Magic and on both ends of the court. And I just think from his perspective, he was probably perfectly fine with those numbers. And then from the Magic's perspective, for Jeff Weltman to lock in and secure, one of those core pieces to your roster, just makes a lot of sense because now okay, we have Goga Batadze on contract. We got Mo Wagner back on contract. We know Gary Harris, ACP, his third year has a team option as well. So a lot of these deals that they did over the summer, just continuing to, yes, you had KCP and Kojo, but you just continue to lock in those guys that had success from a year ago. And this is part of that. I think from both sides, it makes a lot of sense. I think it's a pretty team friendly deal with that third option, and the money makes a lot of sense. And for Wendell Carter, just to have that ability to say, hey, look, this is where I want to be. I mean, that's what he talked about today after practice in San Antonio. He told Mike Miller, his agent, I want to be here long term. Can you get that done? And that's what they did. So I just think it makes a lot of sense for both sides. And I understand if the Magic had waited, who knows what would have happened. But at the same time, I just think from a CBA perspective, to be able to continue to not only write down numbers that you project, but actually have numbers. This is what we're locked into. This is our financial situation, and continue to get that a more clear picture really allows you to orchestrate future moves, potential moves. I think the Magic have a really clean balance. They don't have a lot more things to do. Obviously, Jalen Suggs contract is something they want to get done before the season starts, but they're locking up their guys and they feel really confident in their group. They like their group a lot.
Yeah. They've always established wanting to take care of their people, right? And this is, I think, just another example of that, taking care of Wendell Carter Jr. earlier than they need to. Most players get extended going into their last year, not going into the final 2 years of their contract. And I think I think initial thoughts for a lot of the Magic community that I'm a part of was like, oh, okay, we maybe thought he might be potentially included in a trade at the deadline if they wanted to do like this bigger kind of all-in move.
And to be clear, like this deal, this time right now, obviously it keeps them locked in for 6 months. So he can't get traded this season.
Yeah.
But you talk about, okay, he had this year left on his contract and another year left on his contract. So you would have been talking in a sense of where, he's going into that final year on his regular
kind of
contract.
a rental.
That is how most extensions get done. You're right. But to be able to essentially lock him in this season because he can't get traded now. His
Right.
6 months goes into April. The deadline's in February. He's still, I'm not going to, no speculation, but just from an obvious standpoint, he's still a movable piece down the line. Right?
Totally.
They can
Yeah.
still go through this season. I don't think their perspective on him changes a whole lot because they probably felt confident they weren't going to trade him this year. Obviously, they felt confident that way. They got the extension done, locking him in. So they felt comfortable already. Hey, we're not going to trade him this year. Let's just lock him in. And they can still move him in the future with that price tag because now teams know how much he's worth, right?
Totally.
Other teams know how much he's worth because they've set that number.
And for other, for fans that are thinking, well, what if they wanted to do a move this trade deadline? There's still so many other movable contracts that they could do. There's the Goga contract. There's the Mo Wagner contract, Gary Harris. You got Cole Anthony. You got all these guys that you can add up pretty quickly and get to like $40 million if you needed to, if they were taking a swing that big, right? I don't know if they will or not. It doesn't seem like that's the kind of move that they would do right now. That seems like more of like an off-season type of move, which does line up with Wendell Contract's availability to be moved if we're not saying he's going to, but if they thought that was something that would help them out there down the line. And also I think with the cap going up with the new deal, I think he is only going to average around like 8 or I don't have Spotrac lined up right now in front of me, but I think it's only going to be like 8 or 9% of the team's cap space. So it's not that much more different than what he's currently taking up right now in the team's total flexibility. Okay. Another theme that came up, and I have a little bit of an answer to this, at least stage one of this question, but you'll be able to give a little bit more thought process, I think, on just the bigger picture of it. Is some people were like, wow, Wendell Carter got extended before Jalen Suggs got extended. What's up with that? And I think just my quick caveat to listeners who thought of this is they have different deadlines. I think Wendell Carter's deadline to get extended was today on the 8th, right? So he kind of had to get extended. Or is the 10th. So yeah, like very, within a couple of days, they almost hit it, right? And then Jaylen Suggs is the 21st. I just wanted to throw that caveat out there because, I don't think a lot of people realize they have different deadlines for these extensions. They're not the same. They kind of have to figure their things out at different timelines. So with that being said, Jason, what's going on in your opinion and with the Jalen Suggs contract negotiations, the extensions? Do we think we see it? Do we not? Is he going to hit restricted free agency? I don't know. Jalen Suggs contract. I'm just going to tee you up. What do you think about all this with him right now?
Yeah, I think I'll start with what we do know. What we do know is he is an integral part of the roster and their plans. Jeff Weltman has said that on the record. Jalen Suggs loved that I was the one who asked him that about the extension negotiations on media day. And he said that he wants to be here. He doesn't want to be anywhere else. So flatly, we know they want to stay together, which is a good thing, number one, right? Number two, I think, you look at his first 2 years in the league and you compare it to this past season. And obviously he took a huge leap on offense, right? You're talking about 3-point shooting, and the percentages and whatnot. You can look into that and how that changed things. We already knew he was an elite defender, and then he backed up this year, second team all defense. So if I had to guess, and this is just my own speculation, I'm not going to go off way off. I think this is pretty logical. After this very recent successful season, and you think about the first 2 years and whatnot, and his future and where he projects, chances are the numbers were different for the two parties because one side is probably saying, "Look at him, second team, all defense, and he just took a huge leap at 3-point shooting." And you said it himself. He's Jeff Feltman said himself. He's integral part, right? And I think when you think about the first 2 years compared to the third year, very different. And that was the type of season Jalen Suggs had to have, right, to be in this conversation to earn a contract extension, a rookie contract extension. I think as we record this podcast, when I was writing last week, I think only 4 of the top 14 picks from the 2021 class had a contract extension. So it's not like he's the last one, right? It's obviously from a Magic perspective, hey, Franz Wagner got the max. We knew Jalen Suggs was not going to get the max, but you see Franz get the max, and then Wendell gets the extension. It's fair to wonder where Jalen Suggs is going now. So this is something that I think chances are they had negotiations over the summer. They were probably in different ranges, maybe not that far off, but it got probably to a point where, hey, let's go through camp. Let's see what he looks like. We have to do this Wendell Carter deal. A lot of things happening. Let's get the season started. Let's get into the graces. We have a few weeks. Cole Anthony got his rookie extension done 2 days before the season began last year. Obviously, Jalen Suggs and Cole Anthony are a little bit different players, but these things take time. I think last year I wrote that I wrote recently about last year that 7 rookie extensions got done the final 3 days before the season starts. So, deadlines force decisions to be made. Someone's gonna, make a compromise, whether it's the Magic or Jalen Suggs representatives. Jalen's talked that he trusts his agent and he believes that he's best for him. And obviously the Magic like to take care of their players and whatnot. So to say that, I think I would be really surprised if the deal doesn't get done. Just based on what they're publicly saying. Obviously, when push comes to shove, a decision does have to be made, but that would be really surprising. And I don't think Jalen Suggs wants that. Obviously, he's not just going to take less money if he feels that he's worth more, right? But knowing them, they'll work towards getting something done, and the decision will ultimately force someone's hand.
Yeah, I'm not personally too worried about it. Like, we look at this team's history. They're known to be very good partners to their players and their agents when it comes to contracts. Rarely do they come to a part with their negotiations where it gets. I mean, I haven't heard anything of them getting not healthy conversations around it. And then when you think about just like you mentioned, his first 2 years versus last year, very different on a lot of different ways, like health, offensive performance, just there were so many questions that needed to be answered. And last year was a really good step forward into answering a lot of those questions. So it could be something as simple, but it's not simple, as cool, what are the exceptions within this contract, right? Maybe we're in the right number, but this is how much of that number is guaranteed, and this is how much is going to be connected to performance and health and things like that, right? Because we know they've done some of that kind of stuff with Jonathan Isaac and whatnot. So it could be something like that. I'm not 100% sure, but like you said, it'll probably get done. And if not, the Magic have this thing called restricted free agency that he can go do, and they can set themselves up for success that way. Hitting restricted free agency, Magic fans, is not always a bad thing. All right. It can be a really good thing for both the team and the player. So yeah, that's interesting. I'm excited to see it get done. I'm excited for you and I to have something scheduled during that time period, and then it just kind of happens out of nowhere and we have to reschedule. Knowing us, that could happen again if we're continuing this trend that you and I are on. We are in training camp, Jason, and you've mentioned a few things about what you've learned and heard about with your being around the team so far around training camp. So I want to ask you, right? So this is your second training camp covering the team, but the team, like we mentioned earlier, is in a very different place right now. Last year, we were hoping the team would just be competitive in the play-in around this time. Granted, we shifted our expectations through the season as they proved to be a better than a play-in team. And this year, we have different expectations. We want them to be fighting for home court advantage in the playoffs. So my thought and my question to you is, what are some of the biggest differences that you have noticed between last year's training camp and this year's? And I want to start with the coaches and what they might be doing differently.
Yeah, I think some of the coaches on the staff got properly promoted. There were a few different ones. The one that comes to my mind is Jeremiah Boswell, who was the shooting coach that got promoted to an assistant coach. That's something that was well deserved. There was a couple other coaching promotions within Jamal Mosley's staff. Jamal never wants to give himself credit. He never wants to give himself credit. He always wants to credit his staff for Orlando's improvements over the years, and obviously they're a big portion of that. But at the same time, Jamal should get some credit for what has been happening under his watch. Yeah, I think I'll give you another example how things haven't changed. Arnie Kander is the essentially, I don't remember what his official title, director of sports.
Director of player performance and wellness, I think.
Or something like that. He's essentially kind of like this. Can't even.
Team Sensei.
Yeah, Team Sensei, right? I mean, so I'll give you an example with Arnie is last year after every single practice during training camp, and this continued throughout the entire season, they would come in for a huddle, someone would say some words, whether it was assistant coach or a player, Jamal or whatever, and then they would go over to the back wall and do some stretching with Arnie. And over this loudspeakers, Arnie would play Bob Marley music. And that kind of became a little, I think some listeners will probably recognize they've seen photos of players stretching on the wall. And Philip and I from Orlando Magic Daily were talking about this. Did that mean they didn't stretch before? No, obviously not. But when you see it so intentional from someone like Arnie Kander, uh, it makes a big difference in your daily routine. And to my point, how things haven't changed a whole lot is they're still doing that. They're still they come up for a huddle, someone says something, whether it's a player or an assistant coach or Jamal, and then they break and they go over to the wall. The Bob Marley music starts playing and they're stretching. There's a few new faces on the team, but majority of the roster is the same. So from that aspect, that hasn't changed a whole lot. These are professionals. They do the same thing over and over and over again, and they really stick to what's working. Jamal Mosley's still ringing that bell, making when the team makes bell plays and whatnot. And
that was another question I had, by the way. So thank you for just doing my job a little easier.
We
right now. I
heard
don't
the
have to ask
phrase
that.
"bell plays" the other day. There's still a bell on the wall. I don't know how often it gets rung, but it certainly is still a thing that happens. Maybe I'll have to get some more information.
Have you rung the bell personally yet?
I have not. I've walked by it. It's a nice bell. It's a big bell.
I feel like you need to ring that bell at some point, Jason.
Yeah, definitely. No, but I think the assistant coaches, they're creatures of habits, just like the players, and a lot of it, practice to me were from the 10 to 15 minutes we get to watch at the end of every single day. It looks pretty similar to last year. And I think that basically goes to, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? That's how the saying goes, I think. So, there's a couple things here and there, maybe some new voices, with assistant coaches getting promotions and whatnot and taking on more responsibility and whatnot. But with that said, I think the way they actually work with their scrimmages and whatnot, and the the actual drills and whatnot doesn't change a whole lot just because they suddenly had a lot of success. It
sure, that makes sense.
Dramatically. Like Jamal Mosley's not a guy that's going to change or view. Because we had success, we have to work 10 times harder. Like they know their standard, and the Magic standard is what it is, and that's what led to their success last year.
How have the players' moods and attitudes been, on and off camera, on and off record since you've been monitoring? I mean, we're only a week into training camp, like a week and a day, but I assume vibes are good. But are vibes good with the players? Are they just saying what needs to be said, or are they actually like believing what they're saying?
No, I think, obviously the vibes are good, right?
Yeah,
they're happy to be back around each other. They're happy to be back with the group, back with the guys. They're busting jokes. They're having fun. Jamal Mosley loves the word joy, and the joy in the work they do it together. They obviously know it's serious and whatnot, and I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of the players talk about, the fact that they are aware of the fact that they made the playoffs. They, to give another example, I asked Paulo, I don't think it was at Media Day, but I think it was at one of the practices last week. I asked him, are you guys cognizant of the fact that you have, I think, 6 or 7 national TV games this year compared to 1 last year, if you excluded the playoffs? And even though it is a thing that isn't on top of their mind, it certainly is there in their subconscious, because that means more fans are watching their games and more people are going to know who Paulo Banchero is and Franz Wagner is and Jamal Mosley is and what the Magic brand is. And I think you'll see, viewership numbers go up. So, I think the vibes are absolutely high, and the players know that there's, a bit more pressure, I guess. I think my colleague Mike Bianchi asked Franz Wagner, is there more pressure that comes with a maximum extension like that? And he said he always holds himself under high pressure and high expectations. Again, just because they in their mind, they don't think they've done anything. They made the playoffs. Yes, they were a 5 seed. But in their mind, they're just cracking the surface, right? They know how good they are, or to a certain degree, they know that there's more expectations on them, and it comes internally, it comes externally, but the vibes are high, and they're happy to be around each other, happy to be around the media, um, and just back in that daily workflow.
How have the new faces integrated themselves into this team? Cory Joseph, Kojo, as you called him earlier, Contavious Caldwell Pope, and then the oldest rookie this team has had in a long time, and Tristan Da Silva, who is older than guys that have been on this team longer than him. Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. It's just a funny observation. I always, he's 23 and Anthony Black's 20, and so is Jet Howard. So I just find that funny. Well, how have the new guys been being integrated?
Yeah, I don't think I've seen Cory Joseph away from Jet Howard or Anthony Black that much so far. Um, again, when we walk into uh, the portion of practice that we get to watch, they're always shooting threes or free throws, or it's kind of like their same routine. Obviously, if we come in at the same time, we're going to see the same stuff. But Cory Joseph has taken that role on, has been a mentor not just to AB and Jet, but a lot of the younger guards. He's an NBA champion. He's been in the league for over a decade. He's played for a ton of different coaches. Obviously, Greg Popovich in San Antonio, where he began his career. It's where he won his title. But I don't think I've seen Kojo away from those two guys, and that's a good thing. I think I posted a clip the other day. Jet hit 5 threes in a row, and then Cory Joseph said something to him in the background. So I think he fully understands his role and what he's doing, what his expectations are as a veteran in the locker room. And he's fun to be around. We've talked with him twice now, once at media day and then one after practice one day last week. And he's a really good guy, really good addition. Obviously, we know Jeff looks at the person just as much as the player, so that's not surprising, obviously. So, and then with Contavious Caldwell Pope, he wants to go by Kenny. So that's Kenny, yep. And for me, again, it's literally been a week. We talked with him after he signed with the Magic, really briefly, but now we talked with him a couple of times, media day, and then once after his first practice. So I'm still getting to know him. I'm looking to develop that relationship more. He seems quiet in front of the media, like not necessarily in a shy way, but more so like he knows what he has to say. Kind of like Gary Harris, doesn't say too much, but what he does say is really important. But apparently he's really vocal in practice. That was something Paulo talked about. Their communication is going to be vital towards the team's success.
Yeah.
But with the media, he just seems very to the point. He's a vet. He's a vet. He talks differently than the rest of the young guys. He's won 2 championships, right? He knows what he's doing. But apparently he's really vocal in practice, so maybe we'll see some of that more in the games and hear that, as we get to watch him in person and whatnot. But I think so far Kenny is just really just helpful, in multiple levels of the game, not just the young guys, but Paulo and Franz and Wendell and Jalen. You talk about knowing where to be in the right place, understanding spacing. You saw a little bit of that with Joe Ingles last year, but I think the fact that KCP is even younger, a much, much better defender, obviously, and also has that 3-point shot, it brings you to a different level. And he's a guy that should be in competition for all defense as well, alongside Jalen. So Kenny's been great to talk with. The couple times we've talked with him, but I'm looking forward to getting to know him a bit more.
Why does he want to be called Kenny? I mean, I can see that it being short for Contavious, but
on media day he did a lot of interviews, obviously, but I think on the live stream that they were doing with Kendrick Douglas with NBA TV and the Magic and whatnot, he said that some of the players were calling him Unk, like short for uncle, like the old head. Maybe they're just yearning for Joe Ingles in that aspect, missing that old head, I guess. But I guess the KCP thing is more like that, fan nickname, I guess.
Sure,
whereas, Contavious or KCP probably isn't in practice. Like, I think no one in practice at the Lakers calls LeBron James King James. Hey, King.
Sure.
Maybe it's LBJ or LeBron or whatever, or Braun. I don't think anyone in Magic practice is saying, "Hey, KCP,"
Yeah.
Come over here, KCP. And Contavious is a bit of a long name. Obviously, he's got that Caldwell Pope. I think I heard I was listening to the radio broadcast the other day that Stan Van Gundy called him Pope when they were together in Detroit. So he clearly does have a couple different nicknames, but he said he wants to be called Kenny, and that's what we're calling him when we refer to him, and the players know what we're talking about. So that's just kind of what we're sticking with, and
I
I
like it.
like it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And then with
nice.
Tristan, yeah, it is nice. And then with Tristan, I've gotten to know him a little bit more just because we did go out to Vegas and spend some time together at Summer League, and obviously from the draft night and whatnot. So a little bit more than the other two guys we talked about previously, and um, it's so interesting to see him at his age and his experience of 4 years in college and how he talks to the media compared to Jett Howard and Anthony Black from a year ago.
Sure.
Like I'm thinking back to when they were drafted and talking with them and whatnot. And I still think Jett Howard's pretty quiet. Anthony Black seems a little bit more confident in what he's saying, but they're also extremely, extremely young. And Tristan De Silva is a little bit older. You can tell that in the way he speaks to us and talks to us. We've talked to him a couple of times, obviously on media days since the start of camp as well, and it was great to see him on the court in his preseason debut. But he seems like a great kid. I mean, again, it goes back to the person just as important as the player. So that was just a guy that I think it was the most obvious draft pick the Magic were going to make that night, unless someone in front of them had picked him. So interacting with him, getting to know him, it makes a ton of sense why they drafted him.
This is about our last training camp question that I have, and then we'll probably transition to talking about the preseason games, and then we'll start to wrap it up. But what do you think are the remaining questions about this team that they have to figure out in training camp?
Well, I think the biggest one is Jalen Suggs, and whether or not he can be that viable table setter that they've talked about. Again, and we're going to get into the preseason game, but it seemed to me like Paulo and Franz, if they grabbed the defensive rebound, they were the ones initiating the offense. So it wasn't like they were like, we have to get the ball to Jalen. And some of that's just the flow of the game, right? That's basketball, but Jalen Suggs says he's excited for this new role, excited for more responsibility on offense. Obviously we all know that he played high school quarterback. Jamal Mosley mentioned that he's, calling out the plays, calling out the spacing, calling out where everyone needs to be. And then he says he loves it. He embraces it. He wasn't ready for it when he first came into the league, and now probably is a bit more ready for it. It's going to be interesting to see if he is truly ready for it. So that's probably the biggest thing. Like you can talk about it as much as you want, but being able to execute and limit turnovers and actually table set is a bit different. So I know there's confidence in that. And so that's probably the biggest thing, like whether or not he's actually that guy. Because when they signed Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, it was like, okay, they feel confident in Jalen Suggs' ability to be a point guard because obviously you're starting KCP and you're obviously starting Jalen Suggs, right? And that all came after Paulo Banchero's comments to the Washington Post saying that he wanted someone to do that for him. He didn't want to do that. He wants to go out and score and increase his scoring. So to see the KCP signing and put Jalen Suggs in that position, it's great that he's embracing it. But that's probably the biggest question mark for me in terms of offense. And then I guess, with this Wendell Carter, sprained ankle, and I would be pretty surprised if he plays at San Antonio just the preseason. I don't think they're going to push anything. But that's time away. That's less reps against different opponents. Paulo said shut him down for the rest of the preseason, and we need you for game one. So that's obviously good. But at the same time, you got to have chemistry, and then adding KCP to that mix is important. So maybe that's a question mark. But I think the other one is the two-way contracts. It's not maybe the most important thing, right? Because we know defensively, they're one of the top defenses. They're only getting better with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I don't think anyone questions that. Maybe a little bit with the center and that rotation of guys, and you bring back Goga and Mo, and we saw last year obviously Goga what he can do and stepping up for Wendell, but there's a reason Wendell just got extended, as we talked about before. But I think the Jalen Suggs thing is the biggest one, just to see if him executing. Obviously, Franz Wagner shooting 3-pointers at a better percentage. We've seen it's hard to say exactly if his actual mechanics changed. He talked a little bit about the mechanics. It sounded to me like it was more mental. When I asked him directly, "Are you confident in your shot?" He said yes, with a smile on his face. I think that was good to see. We've seen a little bit more of an arc from him in some of the practice clips. Again, it's so hard to pull actual takeaways from 30-second practice clips that we're able to share, but obviously we
Sure.
want to share that
Yeah.
content so fans can see it. But at the same time, it's like the preseason; you have to take it with a grain of rice. But it seems to me that he's confident in his ability to get that shot back, which would obviously be massive. So I think those are the few of the questions that I have still remaining to see.
That makes sense. You're just teeing up my transition so nicely on this show tonight on our conversation. You mentioned preseason games right there in the last little bit there, and the Magic just played their first preseason game yesterday, Monday, versus the Pelicans in New Orleans. They lost 106-104. I have my theory on preseason games, but I want to hear yours before I give mine. What do you when you're going into a preseason game? What are you looking for? What do you kind of like take away, and what do you throw away from a game?
Yeah, number one, the result. Like if Trevor Queen hit that 3-pointer at the buzzer, it doesn't mean it was more of a success or less of a success because he didn't hit it. Because I don't. And the results don't matter. We know that. It's more about getting the reps in, getting the rotations in, getting different combinations of lineups in against a different opponent than yourself. I think the biggest thing for me from that first game that I noticed was Anthony Black. It seemed like every time he touched the ball, he was driving to the rim or cutting to the rim. It seemed like last year as a rookie, obviously his role was subdued compared to what he did at Arkansas. But it seemed like he was just kind of standing around the corner, shooting corner threes or cutting to the basket. And sometimes he did have success. That one Wizards game, when he put up like I think 18 points or 25 points or something like that. He had a good game against the Wizards. I remember. I think
the
in March.
Mavericks game was pretty impressive.
Yeah. So he had a couple spots where you could see that potential, but I think every time he touched the ball, it was driving to the rim, and that was something we didn't see a whole lot of last year. So, obviously he talked about it summer league. He was looking forward to getting back to doing what he did at Arkansas, because that's the player he is, and that's why they drafted him for the future of that potential. Obviously, look, Franz went 2 for 3. Kenny had that first layup and didn't score the rest of the game. But at the same time, it was 1/3 down on Monday, and the starters played 20 minutes. So it's incredibly hard to pull away from what's real, what's not. But I think for me, the biggest thing was just seeing that confidence and intentionality, I guess, from Anthony Black. And of course, Cole Anthony had a decent game, and Goga Batata hit a 3, which is always, hey, look at that. And going back to the two-way contracts, Jalen Suggs played. He was the only one on Exhibit 10 that got some time in that first game, so maybe that's a little bit of an inkling. I don't know. Maybe I'm really being specific on what we're supposed to take away from a Monday afternoon basketball game that doesn't even have a TV camera. But
I think it's good, though, that you look at it in this much detail and ask yourself these questions, because like I look at a preseason game as an extension of practice. There's just so many little things that the team is figuring out. You got players, like you mentioned, adjusting to different roles or expanded roles, right? Anthony Black growing into his role. Jalen Suggs, he did some playmaking and primary ball handling last year, but he's being asked to do it at a different level this year. That's been spoken about. To the point where Coach Mosley, I don't know who asked this question, but he even brought up in practice a couple of days ago about Jalen Suggs turnovers that he had in practice and stuff like that, which he had a bunch of turnovers last night too, or yesterday in the game, and it's like they're throwing out different lineups, and like their rotations are going to be kind of all over the place. They're not really doing tight rotations. They're just kind of like figuring things out, right? Because it's a way for them to collect data and information on what's going to work and what's not going to work, and not necessarily like we don't know. They're experimenting in preseason, particularly in game one. And
I think to your point about it being game one, real quick, maybe game 3 is the more interesting game of the preseason, right? I mean, you think game 1 just getting their feet wet. Game 4 is kind of like, we don't need to push it anymore. Game 2 is probably a little bit more experimental. Game 3 is probably the one where, you want to get a more solid look at what you have, I guess.
A mini dress rehearsal, as Philip likes to call it, our friend. That makes a lot of sense. I do think, I'm not taking much away like a week into training camp but I do want to know, like, okay, we haven't really talked about this guy too much, and he's kind of the dude. Paulo, what were your thoughts with Paulo in game 1 yesterday?
He's still really good, right? It seemed like he could score whenever he touched the ball. It seemed like he did score whenever he touched the ball, especially in that first half we saw when I think he had, what was it? I think it was like 15 points in 13 minutes or something like that. Played a little bit into that third quarter, but not too much more. But it seemed to me like he could score whenever he wanted to. And we know that about him. He's obviously making winning plays and being that guy, that offensive, engine for them. And it's, success is going to run through him for the Magic. Obviously Jalen, Franz, and Wendell are going to have their nights, but at the end of the day, it's Paulo Banchero and Paulo only. So, I think, if he had come out and struggled, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But I think it's not surprising just to see him kind of hit stride and find his shots and look sharp and score at will, essentially.
Yeah, he did his thing pretty nicely yesterday. I told you this before we started recording. I didn't watch the whole game. I watched about the first half, but it was just like, it just seemed that like a beat hadn't been skipped with him, and he was just kind of back into his rhythm, in his mid-range pocket, just doing what he normally does, which was really cool to see.
And I think with Paulo,
all right, Jason, go ahead.
A real last point on Paulo.
No,
I think,
you're good. You're good.
It speaks to the summer he had. I remember last year with the preseason, he kind of came out slow. I don't know if you remember that or not. Into the first part of the season, he came out slow. And I think people are wondering about his shooting ability and whatnot, and if something was
Team USA too much,
sophomore slump, and then Team USA too much. He had a thumb injury with the FIBA World Cup that he was still kind of dealing with when he came back. I think he was just overrun. And this was the first offseason where he didn't have any real responsibility in terms of Team USA or Summer League or whatever it is. And he enjoyed his time in Seattle, and obviously he was in the gym. It seemed like every single day. I think he said he was working on his body 3 to 4 times a week. He did go over to China and did that Nike thing, but certainly he was in the gym a lot. And I think for him just to come out and score at will and look as sharp as he did, that speaks to the summer he had. And I think it bodes well for the start of the season.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in all these other like side stories, and it's like, but wait, it's Paulo, and he's the man who just was an all-star, and we have so many expectations of this year, but we're we went 40 minutes and we hardly brought up his name. I'm looking forward to seeing what he did. And I love that you brought up that like this is his first like kind of free off season where he can train the way he wants to. He can focus on the skills that he really wants to without any disruption from, like you said, Summer League and just like getting drafted into the NBA and like moving to Orlando. And then like last year, a big chunk of his time was with FIBA and Team USA, where this summer, like, is like he ended the season and got to do, I'm sure was what in aligned with what the Magic wanted him to focus on, but like have his summer the way he wanted to have it done, which is really cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how that just continues to look over these next couple of games and going into the regular season here in just a few weeks. Jason, we've been talking for 50 minutes and I really appreciate it. This has been really kind of a nice way to kick off, the season for me. It's been a few weeks since I've done a podcast. I've just had some weird travel. And so this was like kind of a good reintroduction to my flow, as this is also the first week where my show goes back to being a weekly show and not a bi-weekly show. So I just want to thank you for taking the time out during a time when a hurricane is heading straight at you. So listeners, again,
right?
There might be. It doesn't feel like it the last 50 minutes. It just feels like we're talking basketball, which is always nice. And again, listeners, get out of there if you were in an evacuation zone. Jason, thanks for joining us. go ahead and say and plug anything that you want to plug, and let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing I want to say about training camp that
Oh
is
yeah, yeah,
different
yeah,
from last
absolutely.
year. One more thing,
Sure.
and I'll put a bow on it. The amount of media that's around this team. There's a lot of attention on the Orlando Magic, and we had David Aldridge here for a couple of days. He wrote a couple of big pieces for the Athletic that are must reads. Tim Reynolds from the Associated Press down in South Florida, he was here for a day. You had NBA Entertainment doing an all access practice. I don't know when that comes out, but that's going to be
Oh wow.
dropping. You had a big camera crew around one day last week. So with that being said, I'm making a point here. You know, even though there was a lot of national attention around this team, you want to follow us beat writers that are there every single day, and especially myself at OrlandoSentinel.com, at The Real Beede on Twitter, and it's going to be a lot of fun, getting to grow and continue to develop these relationships with these guys and covering this team. So I'm really looking forward to my second season on the beat, and it should be a lot of fun when it all tips off. Not too long away.
Love it. I love it. Yeah. I mean, those pieces that come out in between here and there they're fine. They're fun to read, but yeah, people, listen to your local beat writers. Follow Jason, follow Philip, follow the new guy with Sports Illustrated, Mason. He's been doing a great job. Follow our guy, Brett James. Has been going to a lot of the practices, but he goes to all the games and he's constantly on top of things as well. And yeah, like, support your local writers because they're always going to have the most up-to-date information. They're always going to have the most access, and you just want to feed into your local community. So Jason, thanks again for joining the show. Magic fans, thanks again for tuning into the show, and we'll see you again for another episode of The Close Up. Till next time, peace.